He didn't even glance at the hospital bed. Lydia Marsh had been in labor for 19 hours. 19 hours of contractions that felt like her body was being wrung out, like a dishcloth. 19 hours of squeezing the hand of a nurse she kept forgetting. 19 hours of waiting for her husband to walk through that door and tell her everything was going to be fine. He walked in at 6:47 in the morning. Just as the winter light was starting to press gray and thin through the blinds of the private room at St. Michael's Hospital in Toronto, she heard his footsteps first. That familiar click of his dress shoes against the linoleum, the shoes he wore to board meetings and charity galas and everywhere else that mattered to him. She turned her head toward the sound the way a person does when they've been waiting too long and have almost given up waiting. He hadn't taken it off. That was the first thing she noticed. Lydia. His voice was flat, not relieved, not exhausted from the drive, just flat, like he was beginning a conference call. "She's here," Lydia said. Her throat was raw. "Nadia. She's here. She's healthy. I need you to sign something." She thought she'd misheard him. Sleep deprivation does that, turns sounds into nonsense. She blinked and looked past him toward the bassinet where her daughter, their daughter, 12 minutes old and already making small fists in the air, was sleeping under a thin flannel blanket printed with yellow ducks. "What?" Lydia said. Oliver Hurst set a manila envelope on the rolling tray beside her untouched cup of hospital tea. He didn't look at the baby, not once. His eyes moved from Lydia's face to the envelope and back again, the way you'd check the time. "Divorce papers," he said. "I had them drawn up last week. I need you to sign before the end of the month so we can move forward." Lydia Marsh had grown up in Sudbury in a house where her mother kept a calendar on the fridge with every important date written in red felt marker. She'd learned early that the world had a certain structure to it, a logic, and that if you were careful and kind and did the right things in the right order, the structure would hold. She'd believed that for 38 years. She didn't say anything for a long time. She just looked at her husband standing beside the bassinet where their daughter was sleeping, still in his coat, holding a pen. "Oliver," she said finally, "she was born 40 minutes ago. I know when she was born, then you understand why this is." "I've been wanting to do this for a long time," he said. "I waited until after. I thought that was fair." There was a sound from the bassinet, a small, soft sound, almost a question. Nadia was stirring. Oliver looked toward it briefly. Not at her, just toward it, the way you'd look toward a sound in another room, and then looked back at Lydia. "Take your time reading it," he said, "but I do need it back." He left before the nurse came in to check on them. Lydia held her daughter for the next 4 hours and didn't cry. That surprised her later, when she thought about it. She'd expected the crying to come immediately, the way it does when something devastating happens. But she just sat there in that adjustable bed with Nadia against her chest, memorizing the weight of her, the particular smell of her, the way her mouth moved even when she wasn't hungry, and she felt something settle in her like a stone dropping to the bottom of a lake. She had time to think. She had time to think about a lot of things. Oliver Hurst was 44 years old and ran a private equity firm called Hearst Meridian Group out of a glass tower on Bay Street. He'd built it over 15 years, which was the version of the story he told at dinners. What the story left out was the 18 months in 2009, when the firm nearly collapsed. When the investors were circling like they smelled blood in the water, when Oliver had called Lydia in a panic at 2 in the morning and asked her to do something she'd been hoping he would never ask. Lydia's grandfather had left her land, not a house, not a portfolio, not a savings account. Land. 1,400 acres in the Muskokas, inherited when she was 26, sitting quiet and pine-covered and largely unthought about while she finished her master's in environmental law and started her career at a conservation trust in the city. She hadn't wanted to develop it. She hadn't wanted to do anything with it except let it exist, the way her grandfather had let it exist, because he'd believed some things were worth keeping exactly as they were. Oliver had convinced her to use it as collateral. "Just temporarily," he'd said, back in 2009, in their apartment in Annex, sitting at the kitchen table at 2 in the morning, with the financial statements spread between them like a crime scene. "Just until we restructure. Lydia, I don't have another option. If the firm goes under, we lose everything. Everything we've built." She'd signed the paperwork. What she hadn't done. What she'd insisted on quietly, without making it a fight, was transfer the title. The land remained in her name. The mortgage Oliver had drawn up named the property as security for a loan to Hearst Meridian Group, but the deed never changed hands. She'd been careful about that. Her grandfather's lawyer, an old man named Roland Finch, who'd been practicing in Huntsville since before Lydia was born, had advised her to be careful about that. She had been. By 2012, the firm had recovered. The collateral was released. Oliver threw a dinner party to celebrate. He gave a toast in which he talked about resilience and vision, and the importance of building with integrity, and Lydia stood beside him in her green dress and held her glass of champagne and thought, "He didn't even thank me." She didn't say anything about it then. There was a texture to their marriage by that point that made certain things easier not to say. He worked. She worked. They attended events. They talked about the right things in the right company. She'd told herself for years that this was just what long marriages looked like after the early years wore off. That the warmth didn't disappear, it just moved underground. Like a river that runs beneath frozen ground in February. She'd stopped believing that about 3 years ago. But she'd gotten pregnant, and then she'd focused on the pregnancy, and then Nadia was born and Oliver was standing beside the bassinet in his coat with a pen. And here they were. The divorce lawyer Lydia hired was a woman named Constance Braid, who had an office on Queen Street West and a reputation in Toronto family law circles that Oliver's own lawyer had described, in a voicemail Lydia was not supposed to hear, as a problem. Constance had short silver hair and a habit of drinking her coffee standing at the window, looking out at the street below with an expression of mild professional assessment, as though she were evaluating the pedestrians as potential witnesses. "He wants the apartment on Rosedale Valley Road," Constance said, at their first meeting, 3 weeks after Lydia left the hospital. Nadia was asleep in the carrier against Lydia's chest. Constance had not asked her to remove the carrier or leave the baby somewhere. She'd simply moved a stack of files off the chair across from her desk and said, "Sit, he can have the apartment," Lydia said. "I don't want to live there. He's also asserting a claim to a portion of the Muskoka property." Lydia looked up from the summary sheet. "On what basis?" "His position is that the property was used as collateral to support a shared business interest during the marriage, and that his contributions to the firm during that period constitute a form of indirect investment in the asset." Lydia sat with that for a moment. Nadia stirred against her chest, made a small sound, went back to sleep. "That's not how it works," Lydia said. "No," Constance agreed. "It isn't, but it's what he's claiming." "His lawyer, Freddie Work, do you know him?" "I know of him. Freddie is very good at making things complicated. That's his skill. He makes things complicated until the other side gets tired and settles." Constance turned from the window. "Are you the type to get tired, Lydia?" "No," Lydia said. "I'm not." Constance looked at her for a moment with the same mild, assessing expression she'd turned on the street. Then she sat down and opened the file. "Good," she said. "Then, let's start." What Lydia hadn't told Oliver, really, except her sister in Sudbury, who had the useful quality of being someone Oliver had always underestimated and therefore never paid close attention to, was that the Muskoka land wasn't what it had been in 2009. 3 years ago, a geological survey commissioned by a development company had identified a significant deposit of rare earth minerals on the northern portion of the property. The company, a subsidiary of a larger Vancouver-based resource firm, had sent a letter to the address on file with the land registry, which was her sister's address in Sudbury, because Lydia had changed it quietly after she stopped believing in the river under the ice. She'd read the letter at her sister's kitchen table over a cup of tea, and then she'd sat there for a long time doing nothing, which was what she did when something very large arrived. Then she'd called Roland Finch's office. Roland had retired by then, but his daughter Maureen had taken over the practice, and Maureen had her father's gift for listening more than she spoke. "Don't do anything yet," Maureen had said. "Let's find out what we're looking at." What they were looking at over the following 18 months was a mineral rights valuation that made the 1,400 acres worth roughly 40 times what they'd been worth when her grandfather left them to her. The development company wanted a lease arrangement. Maureen had negotiated the terms quietly, with a confidentiality clause that meant none of it appeared in any public record, because Maureen was Roland's daughter, and she understood that some things are worth keeping exactly as they are until the moment you need them. The moment, Lydia had decided, was now. Oliver's claim on the Muskoka property went to a pre-trial conference in April. It was a Tuesday, gray and cold, the way Toronto stays gray and cold, long past the point you think it should. Lydia arrived with Constance and Constance's junior associate, a young man named Theo who carried all the files and said very little, but had the specific kind of alertness that meant he was listening to everything. Oliver arrived with Freddie Work and 2 junior lawyers, and an expression of measured confidence, which was the only expression Lydia had seen on his face for the last 8 years of their marriage. The conference room was small. It had the institutional smell of every mediated space Lydia had ever been in. That mixture of coffee and paper and the accumulated weight of things people had argued over in low voices. She sat across the table from Oliver for the first time since he'd stood in her hospital room in his coat, and she noticed that he looked the same. Rested. Well-dressed, the same as always. She wondered if that bothered her. She did a quick inventory and found that it didn't. "My client's position," Freddie Work began, arranging his papers, "is that Hearst Meridian Group's use of the Muskoka property as collateral between 2009 and 2012, combined with Mr. Hearst's direct financial contributions to the marriage during that period, establishes a beneficial interest in the asset that—" "The asset," Constance said pleasantly, "that you're referring to has changed substantially in character since 2009. Freddie paused. "I'm sorry?" Constance opened the file in front of her and slid a document across the table. Then another. Then a third. 14 months ago, she said, a geological survey confirmed the presence of significant rare earth mineral deposits on the northern section of the Muskoka property. My client entered into a confidential mineral rights lease with Northfield Resource Development Inc. in February of this year. The current assessed value of the property, including the projected mineral rights income over a 30-year lease term, is— She let Theo take over for a moment as he produced the final document, approximately $62 million. The room was very quiet. Oliver was looking at the document. His expression had not changed exactly, but something behind it had shifted, the way a building shifts in an earthquake before it shows the damage on the outside. Freddie Work was reading quickly, his eyes moving across the page with the rapid focus of a man doing triage. "This was a marital asset," Freddie said finally. "Any appreciation in value during the marriage. The land was inherited," Constance said. "The deed has been in my client's name without interruption since 2006. The mineral rights survey was commissioned by a third party, and the lease was negotiated after the breakdown of the marriage. There is no legal basis for a spousal claim on the mineral rights income." She folded her hands. "What my client is prepared to offer, Mr. Hearst, is the Rosedale Valley apartment, which he's already asked for, a fair division of the liquid marital assets, and a reasonable co-parenting arrangement for their daughter." She paused. "What she is not prepared to offer is any portion of the Muskoka property or the mineral rights income." Freddie looked at Oliver. Oliver was still looking at the document. "Oliver," Freddie said quietly. Oliver set the document down. He looked across the table at Lydia, and for a moment she saw something pass through his face that she recognized. Not regret exactly, but the specific expression of a man who has miscalculated and knows it, who has walked into a room thinking he understood the dimensions of it and found that the walls were somewhere else entirely. "You knew," he said. Not an accusation. More like a statement of fact that he was only just now processing. Lydia looked at him steadily. "I've known for 14 months, she said. "And you didn't?" "No," she said. "I didn't." He was quiet for a moment. Nadia was at home with Lydia's sister, who had driven down from Sudbury the week before and was staying in the spare rooms, pots of soup that she divided into containers and stacked in the freezer with the dates written on the lids in felt marker. Lydia thought about that, about the soup, about the felt marker, about her sister's kitchen calendar with the important dates in red, and she felt something in her chest that wasn't grief and wasn't triumph, but was something in between, something that didn't have a clean name. "She's mine too," Oliver said, and it took Lydia a second to realize he wasn't talking about the property. "Yes," Lydia said, "she is, and I've never said otherwise." They settled in June. Oliver took the apartment and his share of the liquid assets and a formal co-parenting schedule that Constance had helped Lydia draft with specific language about decision-making authority and travel consent and all the other things you have to put into a legal document when you're building a structure to replace the one that fell apart. He dropped his claim on the Muskoka property entirely. His lawyer had advised him. Lydia understood that it was unwinnable and Freddie Work was too experienced to take an unwinnable case to trial. On the day the settlement was signed, Lydia drove north. It took about 2 hours from the city, once you cleared the traffic on the 400, and then the highway thinned and the landscape opened up, and the billboard signs for outlet malls and water park resorts gave way to rock cuts and white pines, and the particular blue of a northern Ontario sky in early summer. Lydia drove with the windows down and Nadia asleep in her car seat in the back, her small hands open on either side of her face, the way babies sleep, completely surrendered to it. She turned off the main road at the junction she'd known since childhood. The rusted green sign, the gravel road that curved through the trees, and she drove until she reached the property gate, which she unlocked herself. And then she kept driving until she reached the clearing at the top of the ridge where her grandfather had always parked his truck. She got out. She lifted Nadia from the car seat, gently, and held her against her shoulder. Below them, the land stretched out in every direction. The dark green of the pines, the gray-blue shimmer of the lake at the far edge of the property, the lighter green of the meadow, where her grandfather had kept a garden that had long since gone wild and turned back into something the land had chosen for itself. It looked exactly the way it always had. Quiet, and very large, and completely indifferent to everything that had happened in the city. Nadia was awake now. She was looking up at the sky with the unfocused intensity of a 3-month-old encountering something genuinely new, her eyes moving slowly across the blue, as though she were trying to locate something. "This is yours too," Lydia said to her. "Someday." She said it quietly, not for effect, just because it was true, and she wanted to say it out loud at least once while they were standing here together. The wind moved through the pines behind them. A loon called from somewhere out on the lake, that long descending note that always sounded to Lydia like something between a question and an answer, like something that contained both at once. She stayed until the light started to change. Then she put Nadia back in her car seat, buckled her in carefully, got back in the car, and drove back down the gravel road, through the gate, and out toward the highway. She had a meeting with Maureen Finch in the morning. There were decisions to be made about the second phase of the mineral lease. About a conservation trust that 2 former colleagues from her old together, with 2 former colleagues from her old job. An arrangement that would protect the southern portion of the property while generating income from the northern section that would fund the trust in perpetuity. There were a lot of decisions still to make. She didn't mind that. She had always been good at the long work, the kind that doesn't announce itself, that happens in small, careful increments over years, and you only see the shape of it when you stand far enough back to take it all in at once. She drove south while the sky turned the colors it turns at the end of a June day in Ontario. Pink at the edges first, then amber, then that deep blue that isn't quite night yet and isn't quite evening, just its own particular thing that only lasts for a few minutes. Nadia fell asleep somewhere past Barrie. Lydia turned on the radio, low, and drove the rest of the way home.